Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our next EdUtalk. The EdUtalk is organized by the Department of Education together with the Flemish Europe Liaison Office VLEVA. Again, we have a timely webinar as we have around 80 participants today. But before we start, let me introduce myself and let us briefly go over the house rules. My name is Wouter Kerkhoven. I'm the Flemish Education Attaché at the Belgian PEMREP, and I also coordinate together with my colleagues the EU policies at the Department of Education, and I am your moderator for today. The webinar is organized by GoToWebinar. Participants cannot unmute, asking questions as possible, but only through the box in the control panel. And please always mention your organization when you have a question. We will try to answer as much as possible the questions that were submitted in advance and those who asked today live. And they will also be addressed during our panel at the end of the session. The green transition, as you all know, is currently one of the top priorities of the European Union. Climate change and environmental degradation are an essential threat to Flanders, Europe, and to the world. To overcome these challenges, a European green transition needs to transform the EU into a modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economy. Recently, as caused, of course, by the Russian atrocities in Ukraine, the green transition even got a more geopolitical dimension, as there is a clear European wish to be less dependent on Russian and other fossil fuels. In the fields of education, the European Commission published back in January a proposal for a council recommendation on learning for environmental sustainability. With this text, the European Commission really puts forward what it believes the EU and its member states needs to do in this field. Like all recommendation initiatives, the European Commission has been under discussion in the Education Committee of the European Council, and I'm very happy to state that by this week we actually achieved a compromise on technical level. And we actually finished the text, and the text is now ready to be endorsed by our ambassadors in the Coreper and later in June by the ministers in the European Council of Ministers. I will not go too deep into what the text will state, because today we have with us Deirdre Hudson of the European Commission, who will tell us all about this initiative. I just want to point out that the discussions of these texts, of the importance of the team within the Education Committee has been very smooth. So there was really among the member states a large European willingness and consensus to proceed quickly with this initiative. The main point that the member states made in the committee was really to even broaden the text. The Commission stressed more environmental sustainability, whereas member states opted to go for the more known and used term of sustainable development. Also, the holistic approach how to go on with this theme was strengthened throughout the text. So today we will explore also in a holistic approach this green transition in education, and we will go from a Flemish and a European perspective. We have with us Elke van Wildermeers from the Flemish Department of Environment, who will really go explain deeper the actions of what happens on Flemish level. Then we have Deirdre Hudson, who will give the European view, and at the end we have Ellen van der Plas, who will give the research perspective on higher education. We finish with a small policy dialogue, who will be moderated by my colleague Sanne Noël, and she is our Eurodis head of unit, and also Ruud Lamotte and Geert Leemans, two of our experts at the Department of Education, will join for the panel. After the panel, Ute de Meijer will deliver the closing words. We have a very short time frame today, so I would kindly ask all our speakers to stick to the timing and to keep it short and sweet. And with this, I can really welcome my colleague from the Department of the Environment, Elke van Wildermeers. She's the policy officer for sustainable development, and she's the driving force within the Duurzaam Educatiepunt at this department. She's involved in policy making processes, the follow-up of international fora on education for sustainable development, and she's always very active in international networking and also follows the link with this team with research and innovation. So Elke, thank you for taking the floor.
I hope everyone can see my presentation now.
Elke, you have your settings to your main screen.
All right, I will All right. Okay, why sustainability education in Flanders? Very briefly. Flanders is involved in various international fora, as Wouter already mentioned, for education for sustainable development, or ESD, like UNESCO, UNEC, the EU. They all got their own definitions, but if you take a closer look, they're quite similar, actually. Our vision and mission are aligned with the current definitions used in these fora. These definitions are also widely used by other organizations and in the education sector in Flanders. I'm not going into much detail of every definition mentioned here, but in short, ESD comes down to enabling people to contribute to a sustainable society. Education for sustainable development is a shared responsibility between the Department of Environment and Spatial Planning and the Department of Education and Training and related agencies on the other hand. So actually, we are also working together on this seminar. With Duurzaam Educatiepunt, the Environment Department counts with an expertise center on ESD with programs for formal education, local authorities, organizations, and citizens. The Department of Education and Training and related agencies include links to sustainability and sustainability education reference texts on infrastructure, learning objectives, and skills. But both departments make policy on education for sustainable development, climate education, green skills, vocational education and training. But from another perspective, the education department includes ESD in education policies, and the environment department links education to environmental topics. Both departments, as well as Wouter mentioned, are following up international processes on education for sustainable development. But who takes the lead in these processes depends mostly on the main focus of the forum. Both on policy making as on the international processes, our departments work closely together. Apart from what I already mentioned, the international processes and policy making, there's also a rather structural coordination on ESD at different levels. At the level of the Secretaries General of the different departments, it was recently established, but at the level of the policy officers, there's a very close cooperation, which means we keep each other informed. We make links, we align policy wherever possible. We organize an exchange and networking on ESD between the different entities of the Flemish governments, for instance, on how to bundle and disclose the educational opportunities of these Flemish government entities for schools. And both entities are involved as well in the Commission on Sustainable Higher Education, which I will explain later. So this presentation as well has been coordinated between both departments, as well as the answers for the panel. Duurzaam Educatiepunt. I already mentioned Duurzaam Educatiepunt, or in English, Sustainability Education Center. I didn't find the exact translation. Duurzaam Educatiepunt is part of the Department of Environment, as already mentioned, and consists of a mix of educators and policy advisors. We work in Brussels, and we've got 3 different educational centers as well where we work, one at the coast, one in the Flemish Ardennes, and one in the Kalmthoutse Heide, close to the Netherlands. Since we are involved in policy making, but we also have a direct link with the working field through programs such as MOS and Sustainable Higher Education and our educational centers, we can make the bridge between practice and policy. Through our centers as well, we have our own testing grounds for new practices with different target groups. Who are the main groups of target groups of Duurzaam Educatiepunt? In the first place, everyone who teaches and trains others to build a sustainable society. So teachers, principals from compulsory education, lecturers and authorities within higher education, professionals in general working on environmental education or education for sustainable development, and citizens as well. Through educational campaigns are our educational centers as visitors. And the services we offer are in short publications and research, so information, training, online, offline, networking and inspiration, trajectory guidance, advice, and educational resources and activities. ESD in formal education. The main guiding principles of ESD in both ministries are in line with the EU policy and as well with the Council conclusions. experience-based and action-oriented to make all learners feel a sense of agency, of actually being able to do something in the light of urgent matters. The ESD competencies, we contextualize these international frameworks in tools, instruments, capacity building for educators, and they're included as well in learning objectives in formal education through the Ministry of Education. The whole institution approach as well. For compulsory and higher education, this is a guiding principle for our coaching, for in publications, reference texts on infrastructures. The link with the community, we make the link to open schooling, working on real and local sustainability challenges with the local community, as well linked to this action-orientedness. Networking and scaling up by sharing good practices, to organizing events, publications, fact-based information through a cooperation with researchers, for instance, now on the context analysis on education for sustainable development in Flanders, on climate change education, on nature connectedness, amongst others. We provide resources and training, as already mentioned, and our learners are of all ages, from early childhood education to primary, secondary, higher education, and as well as citizens. So the Minister of Environment, what do we do towards compulsory education? The main program is MOS Flanders. This is a partnership between the Flemish government, the Flemish provinces, and the Flemish Community Commission in Brussels. And the main focus is on local trajectory guidance of schools, involving the whole school community. There are more thematic trajectories as well on climate education and greening, and for becoming a green school, which is an international program. There are several capacity building initiatives for teachers and other stakeholders of compulsory education, amongst other a yearly conference on the sustainable development goals. Each year it's around March, taking place around March, named a teacher. And as I already told you, we provide information on education for sustainable development and sustainability topics, mainly through cooperation with research groups. And schools can use our educational resources. I'll mention one, the SDGs at School Compass, which is a tool to reflect at all levels of your school on the implementation of the SDGs. So that's completely aligned with the concept of whole school approach. School can visit as well our centers for practical hands-on activities on nature and environment, but as well for workshops for teachers. So how was education for sustainable development included in education policy by the Ministry of Education? It is part of the current learning objectives for secondary education as a key competence, and will most likely be included in a new set of learning objectives, early childhood and primary education as well. The whole school approach is part of the reference framework for quality education and mentioned in the master plan as well for construction of schools. And there's a program on energy efficient schools with information and good practices. In the context of the Flemish Climate Fund, the Department of Education and Training issued a call for subsidies for living labs in higher education about climate change. The goal of this call was to encourage higher education institutions to use their institution as a kind of living laboratory to reduce their impact on climate change. Some examples: climate-friendly campus at the University of Ghent, urban ponds at the Free University of Brussels, and a kind of participatory research with students into the energy consumption, thermal comfort, and energy loss in a building in the Higher Maritime School. But there were 3 more projects as well in university colleges in Ghent and at the University of Antwerp. For higher education, Duurzaam Educatiepunt works mainly on embedding education for sustainable development and sustainable development in education itself. There are 3 main focuses: capacity building and educational resources, coaching trajectories, and network and inspiration. For capacity building and resources, there is an online capacity building module on sustainability in curricula for university lecturers that will be adapted to other target groups, such as teacher training, university colleges, amongst others. This module was developed in co-creation with the main stakeholders, in this case, universities. In November this year, we will organize an international conference for teacher training, focusing on ESD practices in the Netherlands. And there's a rubric, for instance, which teacher trainers can screen their own teaching practices to detect opportunities to work on sustainability competencies. In the long term, this tool will be made more widely accessible to all teachers. Coaching. We coach higher education institutions on demand and tailor-made to embed ESD in their curricula. Our method is based on the principles of design thinking, and I'll give you some examples. ESD in teacher training curricula, sustainable entrepreneurship in business management and entrepreneurship, sustainability in agricultural training, amongst others. Furthermore, we organize a commission on sustainable higher education, which I already mentioned, to stimulate exchange between people who make decisions within higher education institutions on education and/or sustainability. We also encourage students to work on sustainability by supporting student-led activities, green offices, organizing a contest on the most sustainable thesis, and supporting community service learning initiatives in higher education and embedding sustainability as a topic in them. But apart from formal education, we also offer services and resources to target groups that are not part of formal education, namely professionals who develop ESD resources and activities, and the citizens themselves. For professionals, we mainly focus on capacity building, networking, research projects, and sharing knowledge. And citizens can, of course, visit our centers, but we can also reach them through campaigns such as the Thick Jumper Day, and that's on climate change, and the Week of the Bee on various environmental topics such as biodiversity, improvement of urban hydrology, etc. And each campaign, as you can see on the right side of the slide, has its own kind of mascot, a sheep, and of course the Week of the Bee, a bee. How are both departments involved in the current EU processes on the Green Deal and education, which will be explained in more detail by Deirdre? Both departments provided input for the Council conclusions in a coordinated way, as I already mentioned. Mos Flanders is involved in the Education for Climate Coalition. We also gave input on the development of the Green Comp, a European sustainability competence framework, and we use it as a tool in our coaching trajectories for higher education institutions. We are also part of the steering committee of a project called Green Skills Roadmap for Flanders. This project is subsidized by DG Reform of the European Commission, and here the green competence needs for different professional sectors are mapped out. And the governance structure is set up to realize this transition, both in compulsory education, higher education, and lifelong learning. Further opportunities we see for Flanders are mainly at the level of enhancing education for sustainable development in Flemish policy and practice, putting the topic higher on the political agenda. We consider this a very important one. Stimulating exchange, cooperation, and research on very, very concrete topics like translation of interesting publications, learning tools, and distribution in the European member states, on whole school approach and education for sustainable development, as well investigation of structural barriers and enablers in policies throughout Europe, joint research and publications, but also linking other actors outside formal education on education for sustainable development and environmental education. For instance, educational and visitor centers. On the 14th of October, we'll organize a seminar that could be seen as a first next step to enhance this European cooperation in Flanders. On that day, we will organize a workshop in Leuven about opportunities for international cooperation on ESD linked to the Green Deal and Erasmus. This is a joint organization between Duurzaam Educatiepunt and EPOS Vlaanderen. And this event is for organizations and institutions with an offer in education for sustainable development, but not only in the formal education sector, but also non-formal training initiatives for adults are eligible. You'll find more information on the website soon, but you can already save the date. So Wouter, this is my last slide. I couldn't go into much detail in 15 minutes, but you can find more information on the website mentioned at the bottom of this slide. And you can also contact us, of course. That information you can find on the website as well. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elke. And I'm quite impressed how much already has been done on the Flemish level. And it's also very easy. You make my job very easy because you make already the bridge to the European level. And for that, I'm very happy to introduce Deirdre Hudson. She's originally from Dublin, but of course, as she works for the European Commission, she lives now in Brussels. And I think at the time she also experienced a thunderstorm, as it's been for the last 10 minutes. It's really hellish out there in Brussels, so I hope everybody's safe. She works in the schools education team at the European Commission's Department for Education, Culture, Youth and Sports, or better known as DG EAC. She's responsible, together with her colleague Ulrike Pisiotis, for the Commission's new policy initiative on sustainable education. We've talked already about it, and she also works on teacher digital competences and the new selfie for teachers tools. But I think Deirdre can explain us all about the European perspective, and Deirdre, it's up to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Wouter, and thank you so much to you and your colleagues for the invitation today. Indeed, a lot of dramatic weather happening there in the background. I'm sitting here in the Education Department of the European Commission. We look after education, culture, youth and sport. And I am working on both the digital transformation of education and also the green transition in education and the impact that it has and can have on the sector. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk you through the work we've been doing on learning for the green transition. You heard a bit from Wouter already, a bit from Elke. So I'm going to talk you through that recommendation, which has been discussed over the last few weeks and months by Wouter and his colleagues from the member states, education attachés. Nearly final agreement there, agreement to technical level, agreement at political level foreseen for mid-June. So I'm just going to talk you through a bit the backstory of the work. So obviously the Green Deal, both previous speakers have mentioned it. This is an overarching policy that affects all departments in the Commission. You know, we often think transport, energy, agriculture, fisheries, but education and training also has a role to play as a sector. It's impacted by the Green Deal. We also need to think about our infrastructure, our transport links to schools, universities, recycling, waste. All of that is important, of course. But we also need to think about how we are preparing our learners to move to a very different Europe, a much more sustainable and green Europe and world, which is really this goal of the Green Deal. So education and training, obviously member states are responsible for their own education and training systems, but we work together in what's called the European Education Area. That's our policy framework. And if you just look there at number 3, you'll see that a priority area for us when we discuss with member states is exactly the green transition, how it impacts on education, how education can respond to the challenges of the green transition, and equally all of this digital change happening around us. How can we ensure that we have digitally skilled learners? How do we support our teaching workforce to be digitally confident in the classroom, in their training settings? So green and digital would be something that we would discuss a lot at EU level when we bring member states together. Now, we're doing many different things when it comes to the green transition in education. I'm really going to focus on, if you look at that green arrow on the recommendation, I'm going to say 2 words about the new competence framework just for a second. Happy to answer any questions on that, but most of my talk will be on the recommendation. We also have a new Education for Climate Coalition. That's a grassroots initiative connecting our NGOs, our teachers, our students around education and climate change. We have a new working group on sustainability in education. We kicked that off in January. We meet on a regular basis. That will be member states, social partners, NGO representatives. And of course, we have our Erasmus funding program where green would be one of our 3 core themes. So I'm just going to say 2 words on Green Comp. Elke has already spoken to this new competence framework, which we released in January, just to say that this competence framework sets out those sustainability competences which we feel can help learners prepare for the green transition. How can we support them to think, to plan and to act with empathy, responsibility, and connect with the planet and live within the boundaries of the planet. I'm not going to go in detail. We could have a whole separate session on Green Comp, but just to give you a glance there at the different competence areas within that. This would look at things like promoting connection with nature, questioning our own values. Do we value sustainability? Can we think in a systems way? Can we see how environmental issues connect with economic and social issues? What about critical thinking? That would be a key part of preparing for a more sustainable future as well, how we frame complex problems, adaptability, resilience, and of course, agency, so both individual and collective agency, because learning for the green transition also means acting. This isn't just acquiring knowledge. So just to say that that Green Comp framework is out there, I'm going to give a link on my last slide to that. So turning now to the recommendations. So like any new policy initiative, it's the Commission that proposes, and then we pass that to the member states who will discuss and adopt it. And at the end of the process, where we're almost at now with this text, is the political adoption that's foreseen for the 16th of June. Every policy initiative that we publish is accompanied by what we call a staff working document. The actual political text is around 15-16 pages. This is a much longer piece of work. And this is where we put all of the evidence basis. So if, as the Commission, we recommend something, why are we saying that? What is it we've heard through our consultations? I'll be talking you through a little bit of what we heard from stakeholders over the past year. So just to let you know, again, I'll be sharing links to these documents, but in there you'll find a lot of really nice examples of learning from sustainability from all throughout Europe. From the start of developing this process, we were very mindful of the work going on at UN level. Of course, the SDGs have been mentioned. We also have some tremendous work done by UNESCO on education for sustainable development. So although we were looking at it from the green transition and the Green Deal perspective, it was very important with us that we linked to this international agenda as well. So a backdrop to the proposal, not a surprise to you to hear that, you know, the vast majority of citizens say that protecting the environment is something that matters personally to them. We have a lot of concern amongst our young people around climate change, climate anxiety, and many of them consider that right now education and training isn't doing enough to prepare them for the green transition. And in our public consultation, we heard from people that they feel that education and training as a sector has a key role to play to prepare people for these deep changes that are needed. I'm going to run you through now some of the messages we heard from consultations. So consultations, we would have a large public survey that we'd run. There was 10 questions in that, and also we would run a lot of workshops connecting with our teachers, student representatives, of course, the member states. So just to talk you through some things we heard. So for sure, there's been tremendous progress at all levels of the education system. We see ESD strategies, we see more and more work on sustainability and the environment. But the feeling we got from our stakeholders is we need to do more, we need to go faster, we need to go deeper. It's not yet fully embedded in all parts of our education and training system. Some of these initiatives are more limited in time and scope, very worthy initiatives, but you know, they also need to be sustainable. It's not enough to have a green day or a green week in our school. How can we really go to embedding it? Elke would have talked about how we learn when it comes to sustainability education. There was a call there really to learn with the head, the hands and the heart, so to connect on an emotional level as well with these issues. It's not just about a topic or an add-on to a science module or a geography class, for example. These issues need to be looked at actually with bits and pieces from different subject matters and disciplines, and often our education systems, especially when we move to secondary education, are more in siloed, separate disciplines and subjects. So how can we look at cross-curricular learning? And there was a call for more suitable teaching material and guidance, for example, on supporting teachers to deal with eco-pessimism, eco-anxiety in the classroom. So a clear call for the words that kept coming back were time, space and support for our educators to engage with sustainability with their learners and to embed this in their teaching. Teachers often want opportunities to connect with other teachers. Often they may be just one or two working on these issues in their institution. Elke has spoken already and given us some great examples around teacher professional development. There was a feeling that leadership teams, whether that's in a school or university or vocational college, also need support on embedding sustainability. And there are some clear obstacles to collaboration and partnerships, maybe with local NGOs, for example, with environment centres. A key message we got is really this question of sustainability not being a topic or a thing to be taught. It really needs to be lived and practiced in all parts of the school environment, whether it's our buildings, our canteen, and also what we learn from the formal and I would say the informal curriculum as well. We're looking to have whole institution approaches, so not just the kind of one or two enthusiastic staff members and small group of students. How can we look at the organisation as a whole? And a real challenge around monitoring our policies and programmes. We heard a lot about the impact of COVID-19 on sustainability education. A lot of these great partnerships were interrupted. There was this, massive shift to online learning overnight, and that disrupted the kind of everyday, and it really put on ice a lot of the great initiatives that had been started. A lot of teachers couldn't take their learners outside the classroom for visits to forest parks, environmental centres, etc. So a lot of disruption. But then, we had feedback that there was a new focus on the benefits of being outdoors, new opportunities to learn outdoors, new partnerships that were built up, online resources offered for the first time, online teacher education, and a very forced and quick digital upskilling that took place as well. So the public consultation, what are stakeholders looking for? Not surprisingly, funding on sustainability education. They called for a review of policies, developing new policies and strategies as well, to make sure that sustainability features in different aspects of education and training. Yes, it's about formal, but this is about lifelong learning as well. So how do we bring in our non-formal learning as well and our informal learning? Stronger collaboration within the system. That means ministries and different agencies working together, frequently a challenge at country level. How can we strengthen collaboration with these external partners I mentioned earlier? And then there was a call that we need to work with the here and now, the curriculum we have right now, and also if we have any reform processes that we make sure that sustainability is embedded in there. So for example, if we look at initial teacher education pre-service, if there is a reform, are we looking to see how our future teachers can be confident and comfortable in teaching for sustainability? EU level stakeholders looking for more opportunities to exchange ideas and experience, funding through Erasmus and our other programs. We have researchers here today with us, so looking for more funding on research, and then to have a shared language around sustainability education that could help foster more European cooperation. So just a few key concepts from the proposal. We've mentioned education and the Green Deal. So, how can we ensure that we have access for all our learners, wherever they are, in all phases and stages of education and training, to high quality and inclusive learning in, about and for sustainability and the environment in many different settings? How can we build on this great progress that we've seen and make sure that sustainability is effectively embedded in all parts of education and training? And sustainability isn't just another agenda for education. We see it as a great opportunity for more relevant learning and more hands-on learning, and to really give learners powerful learning experience rooted in their local context. So actually listening to Elke, she would have mentioned a lot of these different kind of principles. So these are things, again, that we spotted in our stakeholder consultations that are really seen as being key, that need to start with our youngest learners in our creches, our kindergarten, preschool, to really build that connection with nature and to run right across the lifespan. This isn't just a box that you tick and you're competent in sustainability. Of course, it needs to be continuous. We need to have supportive learning environments, so our whole school and whole institution approaches are vital there. We need to have active, engaging and positive ways to learn for sustainability. And of course, not a surprise, supporting our education and leadership teams. Building those collaboration and partnerships, making sure that our youth are involved in a meaningful way on this, not just as passive players. How can we involve them in school decision making, for example? And how can we foster those sustainability competences and skills set out in that Green Comp framework? And all of this needs to have a strong foundation in policy as well. So running very quickly through this, you will see the final text on the 16th of June when we release it, but as the Commission, we've called on Member States to really make this a focus area in education and training, providing access on sustainability, the climate crisis and biodiversity in all parts of education and training, from early years right up to adult learning. This should take place in different settings. Of course, we want to mobilise both EU funding and national funding for green buildings, sustainable infrastructure, and also trainings, tools and resources, and invest in monitoring, research and evaluation. Every recommendation also calls on us as the Commission to go deeper and further on these issues. So we have set out in the recommendation where we plan to mobilise our different levers that we can use, from developing frameworks to commissioning research to calls for proposals within our Erasmus programme. And of course, we have that new working group on learning for sustainability as well. So I just want to finish off. I mean, today I've spoken at more at the kind of policy level, but just to share that a couple of weeks back I was in a school in Ireland, in Kinsale, in a small town, and this school is really sustainability in action for me. They started with the Green Schools, Eco Schools programme, which was a great first step for them, but they've gone much further than this. They're really embedding sustainability into everything that they're doing at that school. They're really looking at it through all different subjects, from art to home economics to literacy, languages, for example. The students are involved in many different projects on sustainability, both within the curriculum and off the curriculum. The picture there you see with them outdoors is a new school orchard they've built. They've nominated a sustainability chaplain, as they call it. This is a lead on all things sustainability, a part-time post within the school to coach and guide the students and teachers. And he said to me his job is easy because he said there's a culture of sustainability in the school. The leadership team have made it a priority, and they have made the time, space and support for the staff and students to engage on these issues. We have publications we've released to prepare our proposal for a recommendation, Green Comp as well, that I mentioned, and they're all available at that link there. And I'm done. I hope I didn't run over too much.
Thank you, Deirdre. Absolutely not. We're actually ahead of schedule, which is great, because then we can have more times for interesting questions at the panel. Let me introduce our next speaker. We have Ellen van der Plas. She holds a master's degree in educational science. Since 2017, she supports courses at the faculties at the Ghent University in interacting sustainability in education. And since August 2019, she's affiliated as a doctoral researcher, and her PhD focused on climate change education and a question on how to handle existential concerns of students in view of climate change. So she's really one of the experts we have. Ellen will present to us the research about climate change in higher education. That was conducted by Ellen together with Katrien van Poek. The Flemish government's Department of Education and Training funded this research and the Verlenen project within the framework of the Flemish Energy and Climate Plan. Higher education teachers need support to adequately integrate sustainability issues such as climate change into their teaching activities. And the progress of this research was therefore closely followed by the experts, both in our education department as well as colleagues from the environment department. But Ellen, I leave it up to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wouter. I hope you can hear me and can see my screen. Yeah? Okay. So good afternoon. I will briefly present the main insights of a research project about climate change education in higher education in Flanders, and this project was commissioned by the Education and Training Department of the Flemish government. So the research evolved from a growing number of teachers in higher education reporting struggles to integrate sustainability issues such as climate change into their teaching activities. And these struggles relate to the fact that climate change is kind of a prototype of what Rittel and Weber define as a wicked problem. Climate change entails both scientific and social disagreements about what exactly the root causes of climate change are, and therefore which solutions are desirable and what consequences those solutions have. And in this context, teaching is no longer a matter of only offering the correct knowledge in order to arrive at unambitious solutions. No, teaching becomes also a task of familiarizing students with the complexity as well as the uncertainty and normativity that the climate issue entails. And it also becomes a task of teaching them the necessary action competence. So what we did in the first part of our research, we aimed to get a good overview of the educational practices with regards to climate change in higher education institution in Flanders. And therefore, we conducted a survey of higher education teachers who were responsible for courses with a focus on climate change. And in this part of our study, we learned more about the learning outcomes of these courses, the teaching methods they use, and also the place of these courses within the curricula of the different programs, etc. And in the second part of our research, we did an in-depth study of educational practices to learn more about adequate learning and teaching about climate change in higher education. And we wanted to know more about what students did learn and how the climate topic was addressed as a learning content, how teaching methods influenced learning outcomes, and also which preconditions were crucial for adequate climate change education. And therefore, we selected 15 courses, again with a focus on climate change across different institutions and different disciplines and different programs. And we studied their course materials. We also did interviews with teachers and also did surveys of students. And we were also able to do a lot of interesting classroom observations. And both parts of our study resulted in a research report as well as an inspiration guide. And I kindly invite everyone to have a look at the links in my presentation because there's a lot of information that could be inspiring. So what I'll try to do today is to give 4 key insights that we had after this study. And they all relate to main challenges you encounter once you start to teach about climate change. And I think adequate learning and teaching about climate change in higher education is probably related to tackling or to be able to deal with these challenges. And the first challenge is about dealing with the amount of emotions students experience when confronted with climate change. And the second challenge is about providing action-oriented knowledge in view of the sense of urgency flavoring climate change. And the third challenge relates to support students to think critically. And the last challenge concerns supporting students to approach climate change as a wicked problem, which is different from other problems we are used to deal with. So first of all, dealing with emotions, and here you can read a quote of a teacher who told me what climate change did with her when she was preparing for a course, a new course about climate change. She said, maybe I should tell you what happened to me. I'm really almost tilted on that. It's emotionally, it's existentially so overwhelming that it's almost impossible to live with. And this was a teacher, but we also observed a lot of instances in which emotions of students, such as, for example, anxiety or frustration or grief, but also hope, and that's very important, were popping up during a course. And climate change does seems to provoke this kind of emotions, and this was also described in earlier research of, for example, Verlenen about climate change effective agency. So what we learned was that teaching about climate change comes along with a lot of emotions of students, and therefore teachers are challenged to cope with these emotions. And in our study, we identified different approaches teachers use to deal with these emotions, ranging from avoiding negative emotions to a problem-focused approach. And these approaches were described as a result of a research of Oyala in 2021. And in our own research, we were also lucky to study a course in which a teacher encouraged the students to not shy away from their negative emotions, but instead encourage them to make these emotions object of study, which means that while discussing the central message of a very apocalyptic play, Are We Not Drawn Onward to a New Era, they were invited to share their emotions, but also to reflect upon the reasons why these emotions were present, and they could make use of different theoretical frameworks provided during previous classes. And as Wouter already mentioned, this challenge about dealing with emotions triggered me a lot, and therefore I also decided to make it part of my own PhD research of dealing with the existential challenges climate change poses to students. So this was the first main insights about how teachers need to learn to deal with emotions of students, which is not that simple for them. One of them even said to me, I'm not a therapist, but I really want to deal with these emotions of students in a pedagogical way. So the next insights relate to the question, okay, we have to provide knowledge to our students, but which knowledge do we have to provide? And the challenge is maybe best illustrated with the help of this cartoon, and I will read it out loud. The more you know, the harder it is to take a decisive action. Once you become informed, you start seeing complexities and shades of gray. You realize that nothing is clear and simple as it first appears. Ultimately, knowledge is paralyzing. So this challenge makes clear that we need to provide knowledge about climate change, but once again, not to overwhelm students, but instead prepare them to take well-informed action. And I think that's a very difficult task for our teacher. But with the help of a theoretical model of Jensen's, we discovered that knowledge about climate change should definitely move beyond the focus on the scientific facts and figures about the problem, the climate change problem, and the effects of climate change, but also should contain knowledge in the domain of the root causes of climate change and the different strategies to solve different parts of the climate change problems, as well as knowledge about different visions of the future. And at the same time, we also saw that a focus on another knowledge domain, for example, only knowledge about the strategies for change without decent scientific knowledge about the facts and figures about climate change, resulted in a similar outcome of paralyzing students. So I think this main insight also relates to the fact that it all boils down to a need to create interdisciplinary knowledge, and which is not that simple in a context of disciplinary organized programs. And the third insight, or the third challenge, relates to the most quoted learning outcome during the interviews with teachers who said, we want our students to think critically. And I also saw it in the previous presentation that critical thinking is one of the key competences of sustainability. And but according to our teachers in the interview, it's not the same as spilling out just another opinion about climate change. And that's a real risk in our current society, I think. What we did in our study was also organizing a lesson design workshop together with teachers who teach about climate change. And we tried to design an assessment rubric to assess students' ability to back up their claims about climate change with arguments that are well-founded. And I will give the next slide. So arguments that are well-founded, to the point, and with attention to nuances and counter-arguments. That's also very important if you want to achieve students who can think critically. And now I'm already at the last insight, the main insight of our research. And this last insight relates to the fact that we all know that climate change is not easy to fix, although students still hope it is. And here you can see a quote of a teacher who says, "I noticed that students want speakers who present solutions. They often ask, we want a speaker who tells us what is right and who takes all those aspects of the climate problem into account." And he says, we all know by now that this is not possible. In relation to climate change, it's often said that we need responsible students, but I think the main challenge is also to get response-able students. And students need to be response-able to climate change as a wicked problem. And I think that is the main challenge. And we based our research on a research of Johanna Lundgren, and she identified different approaches to wicked problem. And her study learned us that we need to aim for an integrate and balanced approach of the climate change problem, in which students acknowledge that a solution will not necessarily solve the entire problem, and that different approaches need to be used, tested, and improved over and over again. And probably this challenge is the most difficult one to tackle, because we, as the generation of the teachers, are not entirely familiar to approach this kind of problems. And as a consequence, we saw instances of integrate and balanced approaches in classrooms observations, which eventually became a divide and a control approach again. So again, cut a problem in pieces and try to solve each of them separately, which is not the same as an integrate and balanced approach. So these were the four main insights of our research, amongst many others that you can read in our research report and inspiration guide. So the insights we gathered and the design principles that we shared in our reports and in our inspiration guide will help teachers to reflect and to assess and improve their teaching activities. But as I already indicated, we all have challenging times ahead. For teachers, for example, to obtain the much needed time and space for climate change education, to experiment, to deal with emotions in a pedagogical way, to provide action-oriented knowledge, and also opportunities to learn to construct good arguments to back up claims, and to approach climate change as a wicked problem in the best possible ways. And also for ourselves as didactical researchers to dig deeper in the practices of learning and teaching about climate change, and hopefully to co-construct a much needed didactical knowledge on the topic. And for all of us, I think interdisciplinary education for climate change has to be a top priority. We have to learn a lot about this way of organizing our education. And at last, I think it's also very important, and especially for teachers in primary and secondary education, to transmit decent knowledge about climate change, because that was also one of the things that many of the teachers in higher education mentioned as being a problem. So this was, in a nutshell, some of our main insights, and I hope it inspired you and triggered you to learn more about our research and to look at our reports and inspiration guides. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And it was indeed, I think, very interesting to see what's going on higher education and what your last point is on all levels of education that needs to be taken forward, as it is actually also in the recommendation of the European Commission that will be, as Deirdre said, adopted on the 16th of June. And with that, and we actually very nice on schedule, I would like to welcome our panel moderator, Sanne. She's the head of the unit of Eurydice Flanders and is therefore also an valuable part of the European coordination at the Department of Education and Training. And furthermore, I also want to welcome Ruud and Geert and our previous speakers, of course, Deirdre, for the panel. Geert Leemans and Ruud Lamotte are both policy officers and direct colleagues at the Department of Education and Training. Geert is also a member of the Flemish Commission for UNESCO and an educational researcher at the University College Leuven-Limburg. He works mainly on effective and sustainable learning environments, and Ruud works within the department, amongst others, on transversal topics such as climate education, environmental education, and sustainability. There is a team here today, all experts are working on the same, and this, I think, will make it very interesting to have this panel. But I leave it to the person who's best suited to do this panel, and that's my colleague Sanne. So I leave it up to you. And
all right, thank you so much, Wouter, for the introduction. It makes my job a lot easier. We have received some questions in preparation of this event. I really hope everyone can hear me because I had some connection issues earlier, but no people problem. Are nodding, so that's great. Yeah, we're very keen on hearing your answers basically to these questions that have been sent to us by stakeholders and also by colleagues from within the various departments that are present here today. And I think Wouter already mentioned this in his introduction, but Ellen mentioned at the very end of your presentation. I'm going to start with you because you just gave the presentation and the questions really fit with this last slide that is now still fresh in everyone's memory. About the steps we can take or the paths we can take or should follow for the future, basically. We are very interested to hear what you think Europe, or more specifically and in the context of today, the European Commission, in cooperation with the member states, of course, can do to contribute to this and to make sure that these steps will actually be taken.
That's very important indeed. Thanks for this question. And maybe let's start by saying that at my own university, the University of Ghent, I'm also involved in supporting teachers and educational programs to integrate sustainability into their teaching. And therefore, I know that already a lot of teachers trying to integrate sustainability and climate change into their teaching activities. But as a didactical researcher, I also notice that they often lack time and space to do the things they really want to do. And as I said in my presentation, they also encounter a lot of challenge to do it in the way they want to do it. So what we did in our research was kind of opening the black box of climate change education, as we learned more about the specificity of climate change education and the challenge and the way forward. And I think that we are just at the beginning of this kind of research. So my personal advice would be certainly what I heard of Derde, to implement the Council recommendations on learning for environmental sustainability. They're very valuable, which are very much in line with our last slides and also with a lot of the things that we wrote down in our reports. But also to invest more in co-creation between teachers and didactical researchers to, again, drastically improve the capacity of our teachers and students to deal with climate change, which is a very wicked problem. And not only climate change, but also other sustainability problems, which are often also very wicked problems. So I hope this is the kind of answer to your questions. And I indeed think it's very important that we just don't have the recommendations, but that we indeed implement them in our member states.
Mm-hmm. So I hear you say a lot of support in the implementation of the recommendations, and especially support for teachers so that they are able to also do, because you can implement something on a political level, but of course it has to also work and make sense for the people who have to do it in the field. I don't know if the Commission, Deirdre, has anything to add or to respond to this. If not,
Yeah,
that's definitely. Also okay, thank you.
Yeah, like, of course, you know, the recommendation is a first step and it's almost the start of the process. I think, you know, it shows that there's highest political level support for this, that the member states are focused on working on these issues. But, you know, we will be working now on the implementation. So working with the member states to see where we can help as the Commission. You know, is there research that we can carry out, frameworks, tools that could be useful? A key role we have is to connect and inspire. And one thing we heard in our stakeholder consultations is there's many wonderful things happening out there, but how can we connect? How can we connect the researchers, the teachers, the students, and the policymakers as well to get inspiration from each other? So I think that we have a key role to play in some of our platforms like eTwinning, for example, that connects classrooms, teachers together on shared projects. You know, we need to make sure that sustainability is in all of our EU education policy strategies platforms as well. And we have the new Education for Climate Coalition. That's like a grassroots initiative, again, connecting students, teachers, policymakers working on these issues. I'd encourage you to, our listeners today, to get signed up to that. There's great ideas happening there. It's a real co-creation process. I see a discussion going on right now about tree planting, so connecting different schools, working together on planting trees in their local area. So I think we need a lot more connection and exchange. And there are wonderful things happening throughout all parts of education and training right now, but how can we kind of learn from each other? So I really see the recommendation as a first step. And certainly as the Commission, you know, we're fully committed to working on these issues over the coming years. And Green Comp, for example, is out there for our stakeholders to use. It's, you know, it's a conversation starter in a way. We've done a mapping of sustainability competences, so we hope that teacher education faculties will use it. We hope researchers will use it. We hope teachers, policymakers will use it to embed sustainability competences, to see maybe what they're doing right now. Maybe they are already doing things around critical thinking, systems thinking, but at least it's kind of a mapping that's out there that can be useful. And we'll be translating that framework. It'll be available in all EU languages in September.
All right. That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's very good to hear more about the Green Comp framework and how the member states can use this initiative actually, and how they can use it to implement the recommendations. I've now asked both Commission and the university about how this initiative will add value for Flanders and of course also the other member states. So I'm also going to ask Ruud this question. So where do you see the added value of this whole project? But then from our perspective, from the department / Ministry of Education.
Yes. Thank you, Sanne, for this question. I think that I and also my colleagues, we think that the Council conclusions and the recommendations give us, as member states, as ministries of education and environment, a common policy framework that is shared by all involved policymakers in the European Union. And not only policymakers, but also teachers and all kinds of educators and pupils and students as well. There was quite some consensus in the working group on learning for sustainability on the most important general leading principles for a successful implementation of ESD. Also on obstacles, also on possible solutions for these obstacles. So there was quite some consensus, and it was very nice to have these European conversations and discussions. When we have this framework and when it's also followed by activities such as peer learning activities, Erasmus Plus projects, e-twinning, as Deirdre mentioned, we can try to implement this policy in a kind of a similar way everywhere in Europe. Of course, all tailor-made, not every country is the same, of course. So I think that's a very nice step that we have taken now. And I'm also thinking that this is a nice follow-up of the 2010 Council conclusions on ESD that we had during the Belgian presidency in 2010. I don't know if Geert wants to add something from our point of view.
Not for the moment.
Okay, I think that was a very clear answer, and it's very much in line with what the other people have said as well. So it's good to see that people are aligned on this very important topic. For the next question, I know, Ellen, you've already mentioned the teachers, but I'm going to go back to Deirdre and address the students, or what the students can do / should do, according to you. Because in the proposal, it is written that young people, they're already quite vocal, they're very active in regards to climate change. I think before the pandemic, the biggest event that had happened was all the school strikes for climate change. So that was really, really big. And so this is actually why we are wondering, lifelong learning will be very crucial to make sure that the other generations are also targeted and included properly, because I also remember from these marches and these strikes that they weren't always very well received by other generations. So what do you think will be the best way to do this, and how can the proposal, in addition, help the member states to do this?
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, definitely a key word is, learning across the lifetime, so the lifelong learning approach. And although I'm sitting in the schools policy team, we would have connected with our colleagues working in all parts of the education system, from vocational training, adult education, early childhood. So we really see that kind of joining up the policies is really crucial. From what we saw in countries, there are more policies around the school education sector, but we need to certainly do more in the early childhood sector. We need to do more to link our non-formal and our formal together. So schools, of course, have a vital role to play, but I don't think we should forget the rest. And yes, I mean, young people, we can't do it without them. They need to be engaged. They need to learn, as I said earlier, with the head, the heart, and the hand as well. So it's socio-emotional learning, and Ellen would have spoken to that as well. So I was on a session last week in Ireland with a young student, and she said she was involved in the Fridays marches, the school strikes, but she said when she gets to school, she just doesn't feel it's as relevant. She said she almost feels it's a different world and it doesn't connect with the outside, and there's something wrong with that. She should feel an alignment. I mean, we have a duty to prepare these young people for a very changing world and to equip them with the right skills and competences. So I do think that sustainability education can be an opportunity to make learning very exciting and engaging and relevant as well. So definitely lifelong learning and active ways to learn. And speaking to students a few weeks ago, they were involved in sustainable fashion. And they were saying that beforehand they really felt a kind of an overwhelm when they learned about the climate crisis, and they felt they were watching an emergency unfold. But working on these issues in their school they said it just made them feel that they could do something, that they could act. They were learning about fashion. They had made amazing outfits using old milk cartons, for example. So recycling, upcycling. They learned, sewing. They were working with younger students to teach them on repair of clothes. So it was just lovely to hear them say that being active on these issues gave them a sense of being strong and empowering them and tackling that eco-anxiety.
Thank you so much for that answer. I also saw a lot of overlap with Ellen's research, and which she just presented about, the feeling of being overwhelmed. I think it's really interesting to see that there are so many initiatives that can help, not only with this feeling of feeling overwhelmed, but also, making sure that people can actually do something and get back their agency in this, in this topic that has such a large scale. I understand that it is, especially as a young person, really overwhelming. I also heard you say that people should learn in different ways, that there are different ways to learn and for teachers to teach as well. And I think that it kind of connects with my next question that I'm going to ask to Geert, because I don't think I've given you a question yet. I'm very sorry. But I know that you're interested in how schools, or rather actually the role schools can play regarding non-formal and informal learning, and I'm really curious about your opinion or your vision on this, and also about how you think the Commission can support these types of initiatives. Like, apparently, like, they're already very enthusiastic and they already do, but I'm still interested. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, I think that what Deirdre just said connects very strongly to informal learning, actually. So informal learning is, of course, less structured than formal and non-formal learning. So many of the settings of informal learning are therefore, I think, outside of the school, and closely linked to the daily routines, actually, and social practices you have in family, in the local community, in sports clubs, playing outside, buying groceries, just very, very daily, simple things. And I think that schools and parents and local communities can look together for them what is the meaning of sustainable living and what might not be the meaning of sustainable living for them. And after all, there's a lot of learning potential in the transformation of daily routines and practices. And this is quite a wicked problem. I refer to Ellen. Changing daily routines is a really wicked problem. And I'm not talking about behavior here. It's not something individual behavior. It's behavior that is shared, that is connected, and that is embedded in a whole system. And this is really a big difference, and we should be aware of that difference. That changing individual behavior, is not enough. So it's also always behavior in connection with others, with the whole economical, social, cultural system. The school can engage in different methods for informal learning. For example, collaborative learning, designing solutions for real life problems, setting up actions, volunteering, service learning, etc., etc. But I think it's important to do this always in collaboration with local partners and local NGOs, for example. So I give an example from Alke. So MOS brings schools together, brings schools into contact with local networks and encourage them to tackle sustainability issues together. They do this, for example, within the framework of locally relevant teaching, LORET, or community service learning. Both concepts are quite the same, but it comes down to volunteering in a social project, and at the same time you learn a lot about sustainability by actually doing something and giving benefits to the local community that you are living in. And the second thing I want to say is that, to my opinion, it is interesting that informal learning can happen also through the hidden curriculum at school. So you learn a lot unconsciously from how the school deals with waste, food, energy use, circular use of ICT, furniture. So many of the sustainability lessons at school come from actually daily practices, everyday practices, what you eat, how you deal with waste, materials, plastics, furniture. I say it again, recycling, reuse of stuff, energy, and also, of course, nature on the playground, trees and grass. So this whole socio-technical, socio-material environment that we live in is really an important source of transformative learning, actually, and informal learning. So I think that the Commission should also take this into consideration. So the focus on social practices, not behavior, but social practices, shared social practices, and what schools can do in collaboration with local NGOs to change those social practices at school, in the communities, in the sports clubs, at the playgrounds, etc., etc. That's my contribution for this question.
That's great. Thank you so much. For me, in my head, this has prompted 2 additional questions, one for Geert and one for Deirdre, but I'm going to stay with Geert because I feel like you're on a roll. But okay. You're talking now very much about, and this was also my question, about the school and how it can connect with the world outside the school.
Yeah.
But in the proposal, and also in our own policies and in other member states' policies, we read a lot about the whole school approach. And exactly. I'm really curious about what you would say, why this approach is so important for education for environmental sustainability. And well, you've already discussed how you would see informal and formal learning being implemented, but how do you think whole school approach could best be implemented? And what do you see as the most important challenges in doing so?
Okay, so again, I think that the cognitive basis is not enough to make a transition towards sustainable school or a sustainable community or a sustainable society. It has to go beyond purely cognition or expert knowledge. You only have to ensure that pupils can question their own ideas, and also, I refer to Ellen again, their own emotions about the issue, and take a critical look at systems that give way to unsustainability or sustainability. And the question is then, the idea is then to take from their action to change, to make concrete changes in real life settings. This is also called transformative education. This is the core concept that also UNESCO uses in the Berlin Declaration. So I think this is best done in a learning environment that focuses on sustainability in a holistic way, so in an integrated way. And this means that ecological sustainability or sustainability in general must have its place both in lessons, but also in school policy, in facilities management, and certainly also in the relationships with parents, local NGOs, companies, and associations, and preferable corporate responsible companies, of course. So that there is also a connection with this corporate responsible movement that is gaining strength nowadays. So what do we do? Actually, the Department of Education and Training provides practical information for schools on sustainable facilities management, which is often a neglected area, I have to say. And how the link can be made to the curriculum and local sustainable businesses. So we have done projects on energy saving based on quick wins, for example, and cooperation with vocational education and training, and also on the job training and initiatives for low-skilled workers. So in the social economy, so that the social economy actually can contribute to make schools more energy efficient, for example, to work also in waste management, to work also in catering, etc., sustainable catering, etc., etc. MOS, for example, always guides the schools from an integral school approach, so a whole school approach, and school policy and infrastructure are used as a learning context. So also MOS is using the whole school approach. And a good example are the eco schools. Everybody knows, I think, the eco schools. Eco schools must do very well in all areas. So not only in the curriculum, but also on school policy, also on in facilities, and also in partnerships. And schools must meet the 7 success factors to become an eco school. And these success factors actually are an implementation of a whole school approach. So I think that the Commission really should emphasize this whole school approach, and not only put an emphasis, but I know you don't do this, but not only on the curriculum and expert knowledge, but really also on this side of sustainable facilities management, and to the transformation of learning environments, physical learning environments also, and that we can learn from these physical learning environments in partnerships also with the local communities, and of course supported by sustainable school leadership. and to make the connections between the four areas or the four dimensions. This is paramount to my opinion.
All right, thank you so much for that very extensive answer. The second question that was kind of prompted by my previous question was for Deirdre. I've already announced this, and we've now heard Geert talk about a number of things, a number of challenges, but also possibilities. For example, you know, the changing of daily routines and the fact that school policy and infrastructure and the whole school approach, all of these things go hand in hand. So that's a whole list of yeah, potential opportunities. However, Deirdre, I was wondering, where do you think, personally, or from the Commission's point of view, does the greatest potential lie for this proposal regarding sustainability in education?
Yeah, I really like what Ruth said earlier about having kind of European conversations about these issues. Although obviously our education systems are designed in many different ways, I think it really is a common challenge that the countries are facing. So, you know, through our new working group, we have a 5-year mandate, and it's really nice to work with colleagues like Gert and Ruth in that group. And we've identified some kind of priority areas for consideration, whole school approach. In September, we're going to be looking at sustainability competences, curriculum design, then teacher education, infrastructure, assessment. So in those meetings, it's really nice to work together, and we build kind of key policy messages together, which we then make public too. So that's a really good chance for everybody, mindful of their context and their kind of setup in their country and jurisdiction, but to really come together to unpack those issues. And there's so many common challenges as well. You know, how do we support our pre-service teachers? How can we make sure CPD is quality, our professional development as well? So, and I suppose I'd probably like to see more of joining with, you know, I think education policy can be quite siloed, and I've worked on digital education for the last 7 years, and I'd love to see more conversations between, you know, digital skills and technology in education and sustainability, because there's some tensions there as well around, oh, but you know, technology can also take people away from outdoors, it can weaken connections with nature, but then you can do fantastic things with technology, learning with technology outdoors as well. We know that a lot of the wicked challenges that we're facing will need digital skills and digital solutions as well, so there's a connection there. We know that digital tools and technologies can help us learn in very engaging ways and connect with those outside partnerships as well. So how can we make those two kind of seemingly different, but actually, you know, for me, quite similar education areas talk more together and unpack those similarities, synergies, and even tensions between them. Whole school approach, we talk about that a lot when it comes to digital planning. You know, it can't just be about the 1 or 2 teachers that are passionate about technology use. It's got to be across the board. We have to have our leadership teams there. We need to look at student skills, student involvement. So for me, there's a lot of parallels. So I'd love to see more conversations between different parts of education as well.
Thank you. I think I'm almost through all of my questions. In any case, we're through the time. There's a couple more questions that came in during the last couple of minutes, but for the participants who are still with us, we will get back to you for sure, but that will be in written comments and not live right now. I really want to thank all of the panel to be here, and especially Deirdre for this last answer that you gave about working together and really seeing the opportunities to work together between different policy domains, obviously, but also using new technology and new resources to tackle this issue. I think you're absolutely right. There are a lot of contradictions there of people that would like to see many challenges, and I like that we can close on with this call from you, asking to see not the challenges but the possibilities in this context. So thank you so much, all of you, for having been here. I think it was really interesting. I really enjoyed the conversation, and some of you will get an additional question maybe because the interest was a little bit too high and I wasn't able to address all the questions. And I didn't want to cut anyone off because I really enjoyed all of your answers. So thank you, and I'm going to now switch off my microphone and my camera, and I'm going to give it back to Ute, who has been so nice and so helpful in organizing this whole event. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I am Ute de Meijer, and I am liaison officer at the Flyers Liaison Agency Flanders Europe, or in Dutch also called VLEVA. I would like to thank all the speakers for their interesting presentations and the fruitful discussions. I would also like to thank my co-organizers, Sanne and Wouter. And for those who don't know, the presentations and the recording will be shared afterwards. If you want to stay informed about European policy and future events, I would like to invite you to create an account on the website of VLEVA. And I wish you all a very pleasant and hopefully not too rainy afternoon. We hope to see you for future EdUtalks.
All right.